We will try to make this video as easy as possible so that if you're a beginner, nothing here will be hard for you. And remember to ask, if you're lost, remember to ask questions, as I will be glad to answer your questions. So let's go straight into this video. So to make this the bustier, we'll be starting from making our basic bodies. And to make this bustier, according to the definition of what a bustier is, it is going to be strapless. But then if you would want a yoke, I'll put some explanations for those who might want to leave theirs having a yoke, while for those who want one that is strapless, I'll also make sure to make explanations on that too. First thing you need to measure is from one end of your shoulder, that is where your shoulder meets with your arm, that joint at the back, from that point to the other point. Make sure you measure the back and not the front, the back. So whatever measurement you get there, you're going to divide it by 2, and then that is our first measurement that we'll be putting on our pattern paper. So you might have 16, you might have 15, whatever yours is, you divide by 2. So for me, I'll be using 15. So when I divide into 2, it gives me 7.5. 7.5. So I'll mark that down. So now the next thing you want to do is to mark your armhole length. The formula we usually use for having your armhole length is your bust circumference. That is, when you measure around your bust, you divide by 6 and then you add 1.5. So whatever it gives you, you mark on this line. From this line, you go down and you mark whatever it gives you. Though the standard is 8, but then we all vary in size, right? So for me, I'll be using 8 inches. So if yours gives you in decimal figures, you can actually approximate. So I marked my 8, and then I'll extend this marking over to this place so that I'll be able to mark my chest line. So I'll go ahead to connect these 2 lines together. I have 7.5 here, remember? So I'm going to extend that same line, that same point here. So now from on this line, the next thing you're going to do is you'd measure your bust round, or bust circumference. That is, you measure the largest part of your bust, the fullest part rather, you measure round it, and whatever you get, you divide by 4. Yeah. So now I'm going to mark my bust measurement divided by 4 on this line. So the next thing you want to do is to mark your half cut length, or your body's length. You know, your bodice is basically from the nape, or the highest part of your shoulder, down to where your belly button is, though there are some adjustments that are made there. So from the highest part of your neck down to wherever your belly button is, right? So that's what you call the bodies, or the half cut length, or half cut. Another way to get your half cut is simply your shoulder to under bust length plus 2 inches. So for me, I went ahead to use 16 inches. That is 1 inch more than my my half cut measurement. All right, so whatever half cut measurement you have, you use. The next thing you should do is to measure your waist circumference, and then divide by 4, and you mark on the waistline. After connecting the point I made by the side, I begin to make my shoulder slope, and I begin to look for the midpoint of my armhole. So I found the midpoint and I went in by 0.5 inches, and then I'll begin to draw my arm curve. Now, I'm actually doing this part for those who would want to make a yoke. Use a yoke to complete the upper part of the bustier. So that's for the bustier, that is for them. So, but for those who just want only the bustier, a strapless one, without any attachment, then we would have just started around here, but I'm doing this for the sake of those who would want to add a yoke. So I'll just mark a normal neckline. So whatever neckline, a normal round neckline, whatever neckline you want to mark is totally okay. So anything you want, but for me, I'll simply mark 3 inches, and I'll do same down here. And the next thing I want to do is to connect them together with a curved line. And then from this point, I'm going to connect a line to the slant we made, to this 1 inch line we made for the shoulder slant. Alright, so this is just a basic bodice without any dart, anything. Alright, so now why we do the bustier, why we put that bust, or why we put the bustier on the dress is actually to give fitting to the bust area. Alright, so now to do that, you need to have the measurement of the shoulder to under the bust and the measurement of the shoulder to the nipple point. So for my shoulder to bust point, I had 10 inches, and then from my shoulder to under bust, I had 13 inches. The next thing you want to do is to measure your bust span. Your bust span is simply measuring whatever you have from one nipple point to the other, the distance between the two nipples or bust point. So whatever you have, divide by 2 and you do what I'm about to do. So for me, I got 8. You might have 7, you might have 9. Whatever you have, divide into 2. So for me, I had 8. So I'm going to divide into 2 and I'm going to mark all the way down. So let me give you one tip. If you do not want your bust to show in any neckline you're cutting, do not go beyond 5 inches. Alright, so because I don't want mine being exposed, I'm going to mark 5 inches as the start of my bustier. Alright, so you could start yours as low as you want or whatever, but for me, I'm going to mark 5 inches as the start of my bustier. I went ahead to label so these lines do not become too confusing to you. Proceeded to connect the markings I made on each of the lines. I'm working with a bust of 34 inches. So now, because that size you're going to put or you're going to input into your pattern depends on the size of the bust. So for me, I'm working with a bust of 35 inches, so I'll be using 1.5. I'm going to divide 1.5 into 2 to give me 0.75. So I'll put 0.75 on both sides of the line that shows the bust span, so that I will put in 0.75 here and 0.75 here. If your bust is above 35 and up to 40, then I'll advise you use 2 inches. Then if your bust is from 40 above or from 41 above, then you could actually use 2.5 inches, alright, or even higher, if you know. So it's just like that. So for me, I'll use 0.75 inches on both sides. I'm also going to mark 0.75 inches on these sides, so that is on the waistline. So if the person is not going to be wearing this, whatever dress you're going to make it with this pattern, with a bra, then you would want to give a lift effect. Alright, what I mean by that is you want to extend the under bust a little bit upwards, so that it will help hold the bust up a bit. Alright, so for that I'm going to mark half. I am marking half an inch because this bust is actually small. This is not really needed, but let me just put this as an example. If you're working with a bigger bust, I would suggest, and the client says, hey, I don't want to wear it with a bra, now suggest, and the bust is really big, yeah, you can go up by 2 inches, 1.5 inches to lift the bust, to give it that as if you're wearing a bra. So I'll further extend the measurement I already made on my under bust, that is for the dart. Now, I don't know if any of you would like to have a really pointy bust here, but for me, I wouldn't want that to be pointy, you get. So because of, I want it to be flat and straight, so I'll come down by half an inch, or if the bust is really, the distance between your bust point and another bust is much, then you can come down by 1 inch. So I'll mark half inch above and below the bust point line. Not only do we go up and above the bust point line to give it that smooth flat shape, we also use the curve to your pattern master or whatever to give it that shape. It helps to also contour that area. So using a ruler will make it really pointy and all of that. So notice the part of this pattern curve tool that I use to, I didn't use a very curved place. I used the slightly curved place, and then I started from the under bust extension that I made. So I'll do same on the other part. Now you want to turn your pattern curve just as I have done, and then you make your curved line matching the point that we stepped down by, the 0.05 inch point we came down by. Go to the start of my bustier. So whatever I'm going to mark there will be lesser than what I marked on both sides of the lower part. All right, what I mean by that is, if on my other bust I mark 0.75 0.75 on both sides, it means on top I'll mark 0.5 on both sides. And just as I did in this part, I'm also going to use my curve tool to make a curve down to this point. We're done with adding our dart. So now we come down to the neckline. So you get to decide how deep you want your neckline to go, or you get to decide what type of neckline you would want. If you want a straight neckline that just continues this way, that's up to you. All right. Then if you would want a neckline that is deep or that is plunging, that is also up to you. Or if you want to make a costumed neckline, then you go ahead to even add up or whatever. All right. But for me, I want to have a sweetheart neckline. So remember, the start of my bustier is 5 inches. So I want to go down by, because I don't want anything to be exposed, then I want to go down by 0.5 or 1 or 0.75 inches. But then have in mind that that sweetheart curve would not be prominent because of how little. But then you could, how little the curve will be. But if you want it to be very prominent, then you should start from your chest line. My chest line is 8 inches, so I'll make it that low, but I don't want anything like that. You could do yours like that too. So now I made my marking of 0.75, so I'll simply use my curve tool to make a curve. So we go down to our allowance, adding back our allowance. So you're going to measure here. Here I have 1.5. Remember, I used 0.75 inches on both sides. So whatever I have there, I'm going to add it back here. So remember to replace what you took. If not, at the end, if you don't put this back, then at the end it may be very tight for you, because this is still part of your body, the pattern for your body. So if you remove this and don't add it back, it will surely fall short of everything you've measured. So it will no longer be your size. It will be too tight. Alright, so it wouldn't make sense for you to make a dress that you wouldn't fit into, right? Here too, we also have an inch, right? So whatever we took out here, we put it back here too. So now we've put back what we took out to form our dart for this bustier. All right. So now whatever sewing allowance you want to use, whatever sewing allowance you use while sewing, be it half an inch or an inch or 1.5, then you mark it on by the side, on the side, by the side. So I'll go ahead to add a 1 inch sewing allowance. So we're getting there. We are almost done. Remember, if you have any questions, please ask. So for those of you who would want this to be a yoke, or whatever, what you simply do is you add your seam allowance for your armhole, and then you add the seam allowance for your shoulder slant, and then for your neckline. All right, and then you cut out these from this point. You cut out down here with your already. We're imagining you've added your seam allowance, so you cut out from here with your already added seam allowance. All right, and that is all for the front. For you who wants to put a yoke, but for you who is not putting a yoke, since it is going to be strapless, what you simply do is to take your pattern curve, pattern master, pattern tool, whatever you have, and you place it like this. Make sure it is touching the last marking you have in your make sure it's touching this line, the end of this line, with your allowance inside and everything inside, and then you draw a line from this point down there. So this is for those who would not want to have a yoke, but if you want a yoke, then it means you're cutting through this straight line. So I'll begin cutting. You're making a yoke, you should cut it straight. All right, when you cut it straight, I'm talking for this dart session. Then after you've cut it out, after you've cut out your yoke, then you begin to cut your dart. All right, so that is for the yoke part. This is the front piece, so I'll go ahead to make the back piece. So just as I have done to the front, marking my armhole length and my shoulder. I'm connecting my armhole length to my shoulder, as I've already marked my shoulder, which has been divided into two. So I'm just doing the same thing I did at the front. I think while watching, this is self-explanatory. So for this one, for the back piece, the back bodies, I wouldn't be needing the bust point and the under bust measurement. The only thing I need is the length of my shoulder that is my half cut length. All right, so that is what I am marking. Once I make my markings, I'll then connect with a ruler. The thing I went ahead to do is to divide my waist, that is mark down a quarter of my waist and bust measurements on the bust line and on the waistline, and I also connect with a ruler. Make sure that the neck width for your back bodies is same as the front bodies. While for the neck depth, you may actually make it it may vary, though it mustn't be same with the front, so you might make it very low, or you make it shorter or higher than what you marked for the front bodies. So this process, what we're just doing, is for those who would want to be adding a yoke. All right, and then I made my shoulder slope or slant, just like we did in the front. I went ahead to mark my half of my bust span. When I'm done connecting the both marks I made, then I'll go ahead to mark 0.5 inches on both sides. So you could actually make it 0.75 just as you did at the front, but I always like to make mine half an inch less. So if I used 1 inch on both sides of the one at the front, then at the back I'll use 0.75 or 0.5 on each side. So when this is done, you should have an inch here, right? So we'll take that inch and put it back here. Now connect a line to it. For those who will be needing a yoke or making a yoke, you simply make your arm curve, so the arm curve doesn't go in like the front one does. So it kind of stays outward. It just touches that straight line we made. Simply measure out the length of your front yoke. Whatever you have, you mark, and from that point you draw a line reaching whatever depth of neckline you've already marked. You could use a ruler if you want the depth of the back to be around here. You use your ruler and you draw. If you want the depth to be around the chest line, to touch the chest line, you begin to draw a line, and when you're done drawing that line, you cut it out, and then this other part will be your fabric, and then here will be the bustier back bodies, and here will be the back bodies of the yoke. But if you're not doing the yoke, then what you have to do is you could actually start to cut out. You could leave yours straight, you could make it a little bit curved, or you could make yours slanted. That is if you want a very deep low neck depth. So for me, I could just cut this straight, but I decided to slant it a bit, so I'll go down by half an inch or 0.75, and you draw a line meeting the mark you made for the depth of neckline you want, and then you can go ahead to cut. Then if you're joining to a peplum or something and you don't want it to be bulgy around the back, then what you have to do is to go up by half an inch, and then what you do is from that point you draw a slanted line touching this point. So that is that for the back. Yeah, you would say I didn't add my allowance. Yes, honestly I forgot about adding it, but there's no problem because I'm going to be cutting on my fabric, so I'll still add it on my fabric. So I'll go ahead to cut. So you could make yours straight or you could make yours slanted. So I'm having a hard decision thinking if I want it. I'm having a hard time deciding if I want it slanted or straight. Let me make it straight.
Label both pieces so I wouldn't get confused.
And this is my side back. There's no need doing this because I surely know that this is the side front, but if you want you could then go ahead to label it. So this is my center front. So I'll go ahead to cut on my fabric.